Hello, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of Turn by Turn. I am Daniel, and I'm here with Alex today.
Today, we are going to be talking about, debating, and discussing elements of an RPG. What does that mean? I don't know.
If you had to define it right now, what is it can be a running definition, like obviously things change, but what is your definition of what an RPG is?
All right. I honestly don't know. And I'm hoping that by the end of this episode, I come to a definition that I can agree with. So do you want to say what yours is?
So my language changes the second I say it out loud, but my current definition is any game where you're not playing as yourself, part of the core of the game is the decisions that you make and their outcomes. Is my super rough definition. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting, and I can't wait to get into it.
Well, dig in.
All right. So I started this researching for this by asking some friends what their definitions were. And so I'm going to read one of those now. I asked my friend Josiah what his definition of an RPG was. And he said the elements of an RPG are fire, water, earth, and air, typically. But in all seriousness, he said a game with branching skill progression and leveling up. That was all that was necessary. But I wanted to know what experts thought as well, in quotes, experts. So where did I start my journey? That was, of course, where any good informational journey is started, Wikipedia. And their definition comes from Jennifer Cover, and she wrote the book, The Creation of Narrative in Tabletop Role-Playing Games. But the definition of just role-playing game, according to her, and again, the leading definition on Wikipedia was, a role-playing game is a game in which players assume the roles of characters in a fictional setting. Players take responsibility for acting out these roles within a narrative, either through literal acting or through a process of structured decision-making regarding character development. Actions taken within many games succeed or fail according to a formal system of rules and guidelines.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from that and from your friends, it is sort of based on the choices that your character makes, ability increases or stats, or just I'm going to the store, should I get the eggs or the milk? Kind of choices based versus plot based, maybe.
But I wondered how far, how minimal does the choice have to be? Because every game is about making choices. So I had left Wikipedia and I went to where I find more definitions, and that would be Urban Dictionary.
Yes.
So Urban Dictionary defines role-playing game as, quote, rocket-propelled grenade, you role-playing nerds. But their second definition was a little more helpful, I thought. Role-playing game, video game, turn-based, a game that is frowned upon by fans of first-person shooters for its strategical approach, most easily described as a playable anime.
So I think that brings up the question, would Call of Duty in a general sense or Halo be considered RPG? Subgenres aside, would you say one of those is an RPG?
Personally, I would say no, but it's also hard to, if our definition is you make choices and then things happen. I mean, both of those games definitely fit the definition of you make choices and then things happen.
That's why on my definition, I had added the beginning part where you're making choices not as yourself.
So I got one more definition. I wanted to really, really try and find some expert to tell me, to educate me on what an RPG is. So I ended up finding Techopedia, which is a website that claims to educate IT pros. So this is educating the already highly educated. And they say RPGs are a genre of video game where the gamer controls a fictional character or characters that undertake a quest in an imaginary world. And that there are 5 basic elements that are required to be an RPG. So the first one of these is the ability to improve your character over the course of the game by increasing stats or levels. The second point is a menu-based combat system with several choices of skills, spells, and active powers, as well as an active inventory system with wearable equipment such as armors and weapons. Third is a central quest that runs throughout the game as a storyline and additional, usually optional, side quests. Fourth is the ability to interact with elements of the environment or storyline through additional abilities like lockpicking, disarming traps, communication skills, etc. And finally, the fifth point is the existence of certain character classes that define the characteristics, skills, abilities, and spells of a character, like a wizard, thief, or warrior. How do you feel about that definition?
I think that's very solid. I'm thinking of the games that are labeled RPGs, like Fire Emblem has those elements. Like with a little variation, Pokemon has those elements. Golden Sun has those elements. Things being labeled properly, that seems pretty spot on. How do you feel about that?
The way I felt about that was that, of course, I had to take it to its logical conclusion. A game like NBA 2K21, because when you think RPG, I know you think sports games. All of our audience out there, I know that's what you're here for. So in that game, you can create a player character and pick a class for them that influences their play style and pick a main position for them to play. That would satisfy point 5 since it's essentially classes that impact your stats. There are also level ups, which of course you can buy since it's a 2K sports game. But these level ups give you upgrade points, which you can allocate to different stats, such as finishing, shooting, playmaking, or defense, with even more specific skills under each of those tabs. So that's point 1, stats and levels. There's an overworld where you can skateboard and take on side quests. And if you do enough side quests, you get new outfits to wear. That would fill out point 3. Your main quest is to be the best basketball player there is, and there are side quests and unlockable gear. That leaves point 4 and 2 still. Point 4, interacting with the world, is satisfied because parts of the game and open up new avenues to the player that you weren't able to access before. So to me, that's essentially like lockpicking. It's just another stat that you get to interact with the world in different ways. So the last part is part 2, which is menu-based combat. So hear me out and bear with me. You get the ball, and you have to run down the court towards your goal. You stop short, and you're prompted to do one of a few things. You can shoot, pass, or flee. To me, this sounds like an RPG. Just because you don't see the menu doesn't mean it isn't technically there. And in speedruns of games like Final Fantasy, I also barely see the menu. But it is still there and has weirdly similar options to shoot, pass, and flee. And that's also all with me ignoring the online elements where you can purchase party members with different stats and different rarities, which makes it sound more like a Pokemon game in disguise.
Yeah, I guess that would make them qualify as RPGs. Weird to think about.
I thought so too.
You normally think about it in like fairly narrow-mindedly that it's a fantasy-based game, which obviously it doesn't have to be. It can be any genre. When does the breakdown of like the subgenre? Sports games are an RPG, but they'd be subgenred as, I don't know much about sports really, but like as like the sports RPG.
Yeah, it's very hard to know. And I still think most people at meeting all those definitions, I think would still say, well, it's not an RPG because it just doesn't feel like it. I think that feeling might be the most important thing. And that's not really helpful in terms of classification or clarification. We just sort of all agree on, most of us at least agree somewhat loosely on what an RPG is, even if we can't really define that. Because even after saying all that, I don't really view sports games as RPGs exactly. I just wanted to really illustrate that the point could definitely be made if you really wanted to. Of course, I did take it to the other extreme as well. So many early Fire Emblem games don't have side quests. You're just taken from level to level to advance the plot. So by that definition, that was not an RPG. Pokemon didn't used to have any gear or wearable armor or weapons, even though now we get clothes for our characters. Does Earthbound have classes? As far as I know, it doesn't. So NBA 2K is a more traditional RPG than those, apparently.
Trying to remember. I don't think so, because you don't really, like, your character doesn't really change. You're a kid the whole time.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Let's go over a few games. I'll ask you a few games, and you tell me whether or not you think they could fit as an RPG.
Sure. I'm not going to go, I think, by that definition exactly. I really do think that the most helpful definition, well, maybe it's not the most helpful, but the most honest definition is, I know it when I see it.
I know. There's things where it's like, I don't know chemistry, but I know it when I see it sort of jokes. It's just almost what RPGs have developed into. Well, I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. So as far as RPGs go, would you say Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, by your definition, would you consider it an RPG?
Yes, because I guess something that's really important to me about RPGs is immersion and sort of world-buildy things. This is just sort of my personal definition, I guess. That is something that's important to me. So when I play Breath of the Wild, which I've played it a good amount, I have not finished it, but did a lot of it. I do feel very immersed in the world. I can run around, do whatever I want to do. I get to make meaningful decisions that influence the plot. And some of those maybe are not as meaningful. It's just deciding the order of things. I can do the shrines in any order I want. I can go take on the beasts in whatever order I want. But something that adds more depth to those decisions is the ability to go fight the final boss whenever you are ready, whenever you want to. So by nature of having that be possible, they've made it so that all of your decisions have even more weight because you do have the option to not. You're not just on a linear path. You can just subvert the entire thing if you want to try. And I think that's super cool. So yes, there's also different stats that you can upgrade, even though it's not technically levels, but you get more stamina over time. You get more heart containers over time. Obviously, there's a loot system that I'll be totally honest, I'm not a big fan of, and that's part of why I didn't finish it. To me, it was not a great reward to finish a really hard challenge and then just be given a sword that I know I can only swing a very finite number of times and then it breaks. I feel like I need to save. I'm one of those gamers that I need to save all of my items and hoard my good items until I need them. Because what if I need that? And there's nothing wrong with incentivizing you to not do that in the way that Zelda does, or Breath of the Wild does. But it's just not my preferred play style. I would prefer that if I get a really cool sword, that I get to keep it and use it. Because to me, that's a good reward. Whereas having a good sword for 15 minutes is not a good reward. So, yes, Breath of the Wild, I'd say, is an RPG. And that's all I got on that one. Do you consider it an RPG?
I would not consider it an RPG, and this could be more definitionally based, but I would think of it, in the case of Breath of the Wild, not series-wide, I would think of it more as like open world for the obvious reasons, but the style of the fighting. So like your Link, you have your sword, as you were saying, like your sword breaks frequently, but like your sword, like you press A to slash. In my head, that would kind of take it out of the running because you're using A to slash, but you're not a choice between something else. Like to kill the moblin, you are using A to slash, and you're not using like a list of choices, which boils down to more perhaps the definition of like a TRPG where you're like taking your turn to slash versus just having the ability to slash whenever you so choose.
Can I interject a disagreement there?
Absolutely.
I think that you do have a list of options. Because when I come up to a moblin in Breath of the Wild, I have several choices, the same way I would if it was not a video game and was just a tabletop role-playing game. I can choose to push A to slash, but I can also attempt an accuracy check using my own skill to shoot the moblin with arrows if I would prefer. Or I could, you can't throw the bombs very far in Breath of the Wild, but I could attempt to set them down and then lure him over to them, and then blow him up with some sort of trap I built. Or I could try and subvert the whole thing and get the high ground and jump down on him and surprise him. So there is still a decently sized list of things that I am able to do to confront the situation in front of me that is not just limited to push A to slash.
Yeah, let me see if I can clarify what I meant a little more. So, like, you have, like, the ability to slash or throw a bomb, but you also have the ability to, like, run away. So maybe I'm, like you don't, the battle doesn't stop, and then you get, like, I will take an item. I will use a potion before I use my attack. Like, the structure is more freewheeling. And actually, let me just pause to say, like, we're not belittling any games because they're not technically RPGs. By saying they're not RPGs, like, it's not like there's, like, this pedestal of, like, RPG games, and then all the other, like, Wii Sports and things are, like, looking up at them, like, wishing they were RPGs. Like, there are tons of games of all varieties that are all very fun. We're just trying to get closer to an actual running definition of, like, what makes a game an RPG versus, like, why bother labeling it an RPG versus just all video games are RPGs. You're taking on some role here in one form or the other. So let's try another game then.
Sure.
Oregon Trail, like the old, like, computer game.
Yes, I am familiar. I've actually been watching a Let's Play of Oregon Trail lately. Just because a couple of guys I like to watch were doing it, and that seems like a fun, quick Let's Play to watch.
Yeah.
So is Oregon Trail an RPG? I'm not sure, because there's a lot of stats running behind the scenes that you don't see. And as far as I know, again, going back to where RPG started, like a tabletop RPG, I'm assuming, and I don't fully know how it works because I don't know that much about Oregon Trail, every single time you move a mile in that game, I'm assuming that there is something behind the scenes that is rolling dice to see what happens to you. Your wagon wheel has an X% chance of breaking. And so every mile you take, we roll dice behind the scenes. You don't see it, but we're checking to see if your wheel broke. We're checking to see if you got cholera every dysentery or whatever. And maybe we, roll that dice, and then it's divided by how much food you have or how tired your people are. Which is also somewhat hidden from the player. You get different grades on things like good, fair, poor, etc. But if you're good, you're good to the player. But there's still probably degrees of good as well. I don't think you just go from 100% good to fair, which is like 50%. Like, there's probably more math happening behind the scenes that the player isn't seeing. And you have the ability to stop the game at any time to bring up your menu and decide what you want to do. But then there's the hunting mechanic, where you get out of your wagon and you get a rifle and you get to hunt for food, shooting buffalo or rabbits, etc., deer. But that is an active thing where it puts a gun in your hand and it's not a menu and says, okay, go out there and shoot things. As far as I understand, that's also why the only enjoyment a lot of kids got out of it. The regular game is an RPG, but shooting or hunting in the game is not.
So I don't technically have, like, a great idea of, or like a highbrow answer of whether or not it would be an RPG or not. I would think kind of lean towards no, just because a lot of the stats and things are not yours to control. Perhaps like when you're like choosing your family, like if you're saying like, yes, I'm going to have 3 kids, Tom, Dale, and Tanner, that would be like a decision that you'd make. But like as the game progresses, like at least in my memory of it, like Tanner isn't developing like hunting skill mechanics. Like you don't shoot 3 bison and then Tanner gets like a +3 on his accuracy. They're stats, but they're not for you to control.
I see. I like that answer.
I think that would sort of take it out of the running. And even like our definition sort of bear it out that you gain abilities, but you get to choose what they are. So like if you want to make like a power mad king who's all power, no accuracy or stamina or any other category, you can do that. Oregon Trail, you don't really have that capacity. And maybe that's just, they could make a version of it where like you can have Tanner develop Deadeye accuracy as the game is constituted currently. No, I don't think it would qualify without really like pushing definitions and labels and things.
Yeah, they may have done that too. We're just talking about the original, but I know there's been more Oregon Trails that I have definitely not played. So they may have done this already.
There's probably like some very advanced version of Oregon Trail that we've never heard of, that like Oregon Trail, like MMORG, like massive online Oregon Trail.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I know there was an Amazon Trail that I played as a kid on my Windows 95. It was very similar. You had to get in boats and go down the Amazon River, and you could pause to fish, like spearfish, which again, as a kid, was the only part of the game that I was really there for. And I don't think I ever reached wherever it was we were going. I enjoyed spearfishing.
That would be in your top 5 normal video games versus RPGs, I would assume.
No. Probably not. Can I present the next game then?
Yep. How about you present the next game, and then after that we'll do a break.
Sure. So you said that you got to be in control of those stats. So I'm going to jump to a game like Skyrim. For you, is Skyrim an RPG?
I almost feel like since I was a little against Breath of the Wild being an RPG, I have to almost, to stay consistent, I'd have to say no, since they have so many similar elements. But do you think Skyrim is an RPG?
I mean, similar to you, to stay consistent, I have to say yes. And I mean, even more so than Breath of the Wild, in that there's obviously a robust loot system. There's levels. You are in control of the stats. You invest them not just in heart containers or stamina, but in every single thing you do. Another thing that was important to some of the expert definitions were side quests, and man, there's no lack of those. It really feels like you can do just about anything in those games. One of my, playthroughs, I was a dragon slayer. I forget what they're called. And I went through the whole game that way and just did the main story. And then my second playthrough, I just became the archmage of Wizard College. I forget the name of it. And I didn't even learn the first shout. I didn't want to be Dragonborn, so I just never did that. And I was just a magic user. I kind of set arbitrary end conditions for myself that I quote win when I achieve blank. So I say yes, because the level of decision making you have is pretty immense. There is a main quest, but you can choose to completely ignore it, and the side quests are so robust that they feel like main quests sometimes, or could be main quests. You're in control of all the stats, tons of ways to approach each situation, just like Breath of the Wild, but maybe even more so, in that my menu, if I see a troll in the distance, is I can approach the situation with magic. I can use my sword. I can use my bow. I can sneak around and try to get him with sneak attacks. I can just run away. I have a very large non-visual menu of things that I can choose to do. So that's about all I've got on that one.
I think that it gets pretty hard to develop. Like, it's easier to say what it is than what it isn't.
I don't know. I'm pretty confident Skyrim's not a sports game.
Yeah, yes.
It depends on what you're trying to say it isn't.
An RPG.
Yeah.
Although Swordcraft is a sport, so.
Oh, you're so right. I watch Forged in Fire sometimes, the competitive blacksmithing show. So I don't know, is that a sport? Like maybe. I mean, you could be the greatest blacksmith by going to gather materials and then hammering out swords to raise your sword building stat. So what do I know?
Well, on that emotional conundrum, we will head to our break, and we will be right back.
Hey, this is TC.
And this is Jim from the Studio Demands It podcast,
Where every episode we take a demand from a hypothetical studio,
which could be you,
and challenge ourselves to conceptualize, pitch, and craft a film based on the stipulations
or the demands
we are given. We talk about movies all the time. Particularly, we complain about the choices made in the films we've seen.
We're nerds like that.
And, of course, like any good nerd does, we automatically assume that we could do better.
Even with the demands and restrictions that clearly must have been put on by a production.
So head on over to studiodemandsit.com and listen to our previous library of episodes. Our library of previous episodes. Our precious library, Jim. Our library of precious episodes.
You're a pirate, Smeagol.
Okay, so head on over to studiodemandsit.com to listen to our library of episodes.
And submit your demand for a future episode, too.
So go do that.
Okay, bye.
Okay, end of ad.
Hi there, I'm David.
And I'm Kate.
And we're the hosts of another Zelda podcast.
There are so many good podcasts out there, and some of them in particular concern The Legend of Zelda.
That's right, Kate, and we are another one of them. That is actually the name of our show, Another Zelda Podcast.
And in our show in particular, we talk about some of our favorite dungeons, characters, boss battles. We have top 10 lists.
Yeah, we do deep dives on game design and production aspects of the different Zelda games.
And we talk about our own experiences. We do some review episodes, talk about our challenges, our struggles, and our victories.
That's right. Really just almost anything that has to do with Zelda, we like to talk about it. A new episode comes out every other Friday, and you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and YouTube.
And you can also check out our episodes on our website, anotherzeldapodcast.com.
That's right. All right, we will see you there.
Okay, bye!
All right, everybody, we are back from our break, well rested, I assume, and ready to get going. So what we're going to do now is we're going to delve into some of the subgenres that define RPGs. Alex, would you like to give us a breakdown of what those are?
Sure. So I've got a list in front of me of them. So the very first one is action RPGs. The examples that the site I used gave was Legend of Zelda and Diablo. I have Daniel's face cam, and he's giving me weird looks here.
I don't know much about the Diablo games. Given how wrong I am about most things, I assume it's not a dungeon crawler.
I don't know that I would say it's not. Go through dungeons and things, and the main point is loot. And this is based on my experience playing Diablo 2 and 3, for those of you at home. Yeah, the whole point is just you have your stats and stuff, and you do level, and you get more skills over time. But the whole allure of the game is getting slightly better loot. And I mean, you just get mountains and mountains and mountains of loot. And you've got to pick usually legendary rarity is the best. But yeah, you get to build your character. And the people that take it really seriously, the higher difficulty you play on, the better the loot you get. So they'll play through multiple times. And then Diablo 3, they ended up introducing, I think they're called Torment difficulties. And it just goes up to like Torment 1 through 10 and gets ridiculously hard. But you always get better loot. And there were leaderboards about how far you got, I guess. I don't know. I never played the competitive side of that.
All right. What's our next category?
All right. Under action RPG, it said under that umbrella is also role-playing shooters like Mass Effect and Borderlands. I think for similar reasons. And I think this is also one that if you consider Skyrim an RPG, then I guess Mass Effect and Borderlands are too. because there's all the side quests, open worldy things. You get loot, you invest stat points, etc. You want to add something to that?
No, what I'm slowly, I guess, deciding is that it's a very sliding scale.
Yeah, I'm realizing that too.
Maybe, as with a lot of things in the world, one label isn't enough to cover everything.
If we were a visual medium, I would probably have highlighted, like, put that in highlights with flashing lights and said moral of the story.
This is my wise teaching for the day.
Yeah. So the next one is first-person party-based RPG. And this is not a subgenre that I see as often anymore. And even the examples are a little bit older. But what this is players lead a party of adventurers in the first-person perspective, typically through a dungeon or labyrinth on a grid-based system. Games that fit this are games like Shining in the Darkness, Eye of the Beholder, Legend of Grimrock, and Might and Magic. Players also often have to draw their own maps to find their way through these dungeons.
Wait. They have to draw their own maps?
Yeah, like you're going to have to map out the dungeon yourself.
Fascinating. I have not played any of those. I've heard of Shining in the Darkness.
I have played Eye of the Beholder and a very tiny bit of Legends of Grimrock. It is really, really hard.
I would imagine so if you have to draw your own maps. I know that I wouldn't have the patience for that, for one.
Yeah, I think when I sat down to play it, I had Eye of the Beholder for Game Boy Advance. They put it out on that. You definitely, like, it's fun, but you really have to be in a mindset where you're ready to sit down with graph paper and potentially a few of your friends in real life that can help you along the way. And when I was younger playing Eye of the Beholder, I definitely did not have the patience or the wherewithal to sit down and mathematically graph it all. But it definitely feels like you're going on an adventure.
I guess so. Like a choose your own adventure sort of game almost.
Yeah, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The next one is MMORPGs like World of Warcraft, Star Wars The Old Republic, and way too many more to list.
Okay, so like Knights of the Old Republic.
Just the Old Republic, because Knights of the Old Republic is single player.
Okay.
The Old Republic was the one where they made it like World of Warcraft, and it's online and lots of things happen. And I put a lot of hours into the Old Republic, actually.
Is that like Star Wars Galaxies?
Sort of. I'm too young to really have played Star Wars Galaxies, and my household, I think, didn't adopt internet fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
But from people I've talked to that have played both, it does not replace Galaxies in their heart.
We had Galaxies growing up, but we didn't realize that you needed internet to play it. So we had it, but we didn't have the internet to do it.
Aw.
So I was almost popular.
For the Old Republic, you pick if you're the Republic or the Sith Empire, and then you get a choice between 4 classes on each of those sides. And the thing I really liked about it was that the storylines were very in-depth for each of those. Every single character in the entire game was voice acted. I think it got a Guinness Book of World Records medal for having the most voice acting in a game. Because, I mean, it was thousands and thousands of characters. I think. I just know it was a ton of dialogue. But the choices you could make were really, really impactful and interesting. So, like, I think the best experience I had with it in terms of choices was for the light side, I played a Jedi Consular, which is sort of the healer class. And you can also choose to be light side or dark side, no matter what class you're playing. So I was like, what if I play like a Jedi healer and I'm essentially this sage that's respected by all the Jedi, but I just display all these dark side tendencies. So the quest for the healer is that lots of Jedi Masters across the galaxy have been getting sick with some sort of ailment that eats away at their mind. And it is your job, as someone who has solved this conundrum, to go fix them all. But the level of choices you're allowed to make blew me away. So my journey through that was when I figured out how to save the Jedi Masters, I didn't tell anybody. I think the council knew, and that's why they sent me on my mission. But when I came to a Jedi Master that was like, okay, I have this affliction, I need you to help me, I had the option to tell that Jedi Master, I don't know how to help you. I guess I've got to kill you instead. And them being Jedi are like, all right, do what you have to do. So I just became like a healer, but really I was the galaxy's greatest Jedi Master assassin. Just assassinating all these other Jedi Masters. And the council sanctioned me to do it.
Surprise!
Everything seems pretty consistent with that, so it just really blew me away.
Okay, so what's our next category?
Our next category is roguelikes, and that is games with procedurally generated levels and typically permadeath, all based on the original game Rogue. Games today that fit this are games like Rogue Legacy and Spelunky. And it didn't list them as a example, but I think Darkest Dungeon also fits. So essentially, it's just that the game is auto-generated and it's different every time. Have you played any games like that? Or
I have not. Surprisingly.
I've played Rogue Legacy a good amount, and Spelunky. I just got Spelunky 2 not too long ago. It just came out not too long ago. But that's been a really great experience, with it being different every time. And I think you're probably more going to think an RPG thing. Like, I'm surprised roguelike fits in the RPG category. If you had asked me to list the subgenres, I probably would not have put that in there. But it just doesn't... those don't feel as RPG-y to me, unless you are getting stat boosts or increases after you play through the game each time. Which some games you do, like Rogue Legacy, you could pass things on to your children, and there were choices you could make. But Spelunky, that doesn't have that. I don't know how much that is an RPG to me.
That really kind of seems like a stretch category there.
I agree.
But what's our next category?
And that's not talking down on you, obviously, if you like roguelikes. I mean, more power to you. The next one is sandbox RPGs, or open world RPGs. These are games like Dragon Quest, Fable, Xenoblade Chronicles, and Secret of Mana.
This is where I would slot in Legend of Zelda.
Yes, I would as well.
As including it in the definition of an RPG, this is where I would slot those games. I can't speak highly enough about them, but categorize them as RPGs other than this category, I think would qualify them for sure.
Yes, and I also have more. I have a lot of thoughts on sandbox RPGs, so I'll spare you from some of those, but just some of them are like, I'm glad that we're getting out of the trend a little bit, but I think it's pretty obvious we experience large scale trends in gaming. Like when Overwatch came out, everything had to be a hero shooter. When Minecraft came out, everything needed crafting and survival elements. When World of Warcraft came out, everything needed to be an MMORPG. And I think sandbox RPG and open world RPG, we're still in a little bit of that boom where everything, it feels like, needs to be open world. And there's definitely been some games I've played that I think, wow, this really didn't need to be open world. open world is just very hard to do because you have to give the player so many things to do. It's got to be somewhat meaningful, and you've got to have a really, really competent dev team to give the player enough to do. Because if not, then you're just going to be walking from point A to point B, and it's going to take you a really long time to get anywhere, and nothing is going to happen on your way.
Yeah, which I think, not to get too off track here, but I think the ability to develop the environment makes a big difference. Because if I'm just walking through a forest for 2 hours to get from point A to point B, I'm going to get bored. But if you toss in like relics of old kingdoms or like old buried tech or something along the way, I'm going to have more fun like walking around and like looking at what there is to see than I am with whatever point B is going to give me.
Yeah, for sure.
The more like creator designer elements like you're talking about that are in there, the more fun you'll have. Like, I haven't extensively played Breath of the Wild. I've only just started. Got to the point where I got a little lost on the plot, so I just started wandering around and I found all these cool things. I found a woman who like will like attack you if you touch her flowers, and like all kinds of these like random things that were really fun to find. And I had just as much fun like stumbling upon them without following whatever the plot of the game is. So I think it can be like a master stroke if you put in the effort of like adding in that like weird stuff.
Yeah. That, or another thing I did not think would work for me that ended up working for me somewhat was another one I haven't finished. Because wow, is it long. But Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Going from point A to point B, I didn't always feel like there was a lot to do, but that game was just so beautiful that even if I was just walking through a forest for an hour, there was enough amazing scenery with that, and the music was really nice. I don't know, the whole experience, I just felt great about it.
I think the killer soundtrack helps too. So, because like if you have that like really like swashbuckling adventure music, you're gonna want to explore more because you're like, yeah, I'm on an adventure. Let's see where this is gonna head. A combination of like putting in the effort on developing your sandbox and then like detailing, putting the work with the details, the sound, the score, like fills it out.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back to immersion. If you can immerse me in your world, I'm gonna be happy. And there's even games that I think somewhat fit this. Like I've been playing Dynasty Warriors 9 a lot, and I know that you're not familiar with those that much. We've talked about this before, but I really like the Warriors games. For those of you at home, that's also some of the more popular ones are like Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, One Piece Pirate Warriors. They've done lots of crossovers, but the original is Dynasty Warriors. And for number 9, they made it open world. And I will fully admit, objectively, I don't think it's a very good game. There's not a lot to do in the environment, and I do spend a lot of time just running from point A to point B. But because I care about that world so much, and I don't know, I find myself getting really immersed. I still have a lot of fun, despite being able to admit it's not a great game. And that's okay, too. And that's not something that I am very sensitive about. That I play lots of games that if I look at more objective measures, I can say, I don't think this is very good, but it's still a lot of fun.
I feel like a lot of games have that quality where like there'll be like 5 like hardcore people that like are obsessively talking about one game, and then like the general overview will be like, it's not a very good game. So my other life lesson of this episode is don't let people discourage you if you like a game that no one else seems to like.
Yeah, because as long as you're having fun, that's what gaming is about. And if you're playing a game that's supposed to be amazing and all of the outlets told you that it was a 10 out of 10 and you're just not feeling it, then just stop playing it. Like, gaming is supposed to be fun. And I think that's a great segue to the last subgenre I have, because it is also my favorite, and I think Daniel's favorite, and that is tactical RPGs. And they, for what that is, the literal quote from the website I was on was descendants of chess, essentially. Combat on a grid, multiple party members. And that's games like Fire Emblem, Shining Force, and XCOM.
Mm-hmm. So I think as far as my definition goes, my bias here is any sort of bias is that TRPGs are basically what I think are RPGs. Like if it has like the turn-based quality, a la our podcast name, that makes it an RPG by the book. Like no variations, which is just me kind of like spouting off my personal like opinion just because the TRPGs are my favorite. So it's like, no, these are the real ones. But obviously there's a lot more categories of what an RPG can be than just turn-based.
For sure. And I definitely fall into that too. Sometimes. Guess there's sort of a sliding scale of what an RPG is. I think that is my definition that I'm going to settle on, is that it depends, and there's things that are more an RPG and less an RPG to me. But it's just like anything else, you know. If I'm listening to a heavy metal album and then they throw in a harp solo, is it now a harp album? Well, I mean, I guess a percent of it is. So it's the same with games, that even though it's a first-person shooter like Borderlands, because there's loot and level ups and classes, is it an RPG? I mean, I guess percent of it is. But tactical ones are definitely my favorite too. I think that has to do with, I talked about a little bit with Breath of the Wild, that I don't feel like having a new sword for 15 minutes is a very good reward. Having a character that you can get that'll go on your journey with you is a great reward. And tactical RPGs, I have found, just seem to have the most of that in a meaningful way to me. If I find a character in Fire Emblem, it just feels like a very meaningful unlock that is worth whatever the grind is to get there. I don't know how you feel about that, Daniel, if that is important to you.
I would agree. I think that whatever the reward is in Fire Emblem, in Shining Force games, like I miss characters because I'm not very observant. I just don't enter the house that they're waiting for me to go into, or like I miss out on a lot of them. So like the ones that I do find, I always feel like super clever whenever I stumble upon them, because it's like, oh yeah, I found that one. And then I'll look back at like the character list when I finish the game, and there'll be like 10 that I missed. The reward makes it worth it.
We should also probably talk about the combat in that a little bit, since that is the thing that sets it apart.
What do you like about the like tactical combat?
I think it's that I feel like I am more in control of the characters, because with several of the other subgenres, going back to like sandbox RPGs like Xenoblade 2, one of the reasons I didn't finish it, despite loving the story, the character design, everything about it, was the combat put me off really hard, because it's sort of turn-based, so I never really felt like in combat I was fully in control. And it's the same a little bit with games like Final Fantasy. I don't want to say that I never feel in control, but if all I'm doing is picking things from a menu, I don't always feel like I have the most control in the situation. But if it's something like I'm on a grid and I'm moving characters around and I'm choosing who gets experience points and who doesn't by using them or not, and I get to put characters in different situations. You know, I can put my archer behind my general that is all armored up and stuff. Whereas in a game where in an RPG where it presents all your characters in a straight line, I don't get to choose formation, things like that would make more sense. You would just put my archer next to my warrior that is holding his sword, and my archer can be hit as much as they want, and why would you not go for that guy? But the ability to arrange them in meaningful ways just does a lot for me. And I feel like I get more usability out of characters, and maybe you can even vary up the characters a little more, that I can have a mage that's a glass cannon, but I don't that's okay. Because I can make sure that mage doesn't take hits.
I think that I like the field commander part of it, where like you're the tactician and like you get to decide what your plan is. You're not just running up to a random enemy and attacking them with your sword. You have to plan out for however the game designer designed the enemies to come at you. It's basically like chess, you versus the game designer. Like, can you plan around whatever trap they set for you?
Yeah. Something you said too was you are the tactician and stuff, and I think I view them a little bit differently. In any RPG I play, I usually like to have party members, but I need to feel like I am playing as whoever I want to be playing as, I guess. So I don't like it in games when it gives you a main character and then it's like, well, you can't, your party members are with you, but you are not in control of your party members. I like to feel like I'm playing as all of the party members. And that's not saying one is better than the other or worse. I really liked Mass Effect, and that's a game where you don't have full control of your party members. You can tell them what to do, but you'll never play as like Garrus, as an example. You never take command of Garrus and use his, play as him and shoot his guns with your aim. But tactical games, I am playing as the character with a bow and I'm shooting the arrow. And then I am playing as the character with a sword and I'm swinging the sword, sort of. And I really like that a lot.
It very much matches the chess model where it's like, okay, I have my knight and my knight will go where I would like him to. You're just subbing in archer, wizard, mage, whatever terms the game is using for bishop, queen, king, pawn, etc.
Yes, and where I grabbed this list, it said that these games do not typically have multiplayer. And I agree, but that is also something that really irks me. Because I feel like it would not be too difficult, and if you're a game dev and listening to this, feel free to steal the idea. I feel like it wouldn't be too difficult to make a game that was a tactical strategy RPG, and you don't even have to do it all on your end. If you give communities the ability to design their own levels, they absolutely will. Fire Emblem has tried to have multiplayer a couple times. It did in Shadow Dragon, and it did in Fates, I think. It did in Awakening too, but I played Fates multiplayer more. None of those worked very well. The reason being, I think, is that part of it was level design. You've got to give players the ability to sort of match stats so it's somewhat even. You got to vary up the level design more. Just throwing two armies against each other doesn't work as well as, well, one side gets more characters and one side gets less, but the side that gets less gets to be in a castle and have more defensible positions, things like that. Or another thing I've always wanted is to play a Fire Emblem game where I have a friend or something that can connect another controller and they can be the enemies. And their goal is not to necessarily even win a battle. But in a game like Fire Emblem that has permadeath, your goal might be to take out one member of my party in this battle. And that's just something that I thought would be really, really cool, using faceless soldiers, and just seeing if you can coordinate them in ways that they're better than the AI. Because there's definitely times, and I know you played Sacred Stones, that I feel like, oh, the AI could really have finished me off there. And then they decide not to. I just think it'd be really cool for another player to be in control of that. And it doesn't have to be totally evenly balanced.
Almost like Fire Emblem Dark Mode.
Yeah, evil mode.
You take over the soldiers. I could see that being like a cool like unlock mode where like you could like build to that.
Yeah, just something, because that I don't. And if you're listening to this right now and you have a game that you're thinking, oh, that's just like that, well, definitely comment that or get it to me somehow, because I would love to play that.
All right. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, the end of the list even said, like that's all the subgenres, but at the end they even say it's pretty murky. It really is. And they list something like Grand Theft Auto as an example, that they're like, well, there's stat points that you apply to things like stamina, weapon proficiency, driving, swimming, etc. But it's not considered an RPG by pretty much anybody. But I mean, you've got the stat points, you've got the decision making and the open world, and to me, it is sort of a sandbox RPG. I've been playing. I'm not really a GTA person, but I had some friends that wanted to play GTA 5, so I've been doing that for the first time. Almost wonder if it's just that being an RPG, sort of like Urban Dictionary defines it, you know, it carries some more nerdy connotations, I guess, and I wonder if some people want to escape that. Or more anime connotations. But when you're looking at things like Skyrim and Mass Effect and saying, yeah, those are RPGs, it's not really. It'd be hard to argue that Mass Effect or Skyrim is anime. But I wonder if that's part of it too, is the stigma a little bit of that. And I don't really. I think it comes down to I don't fully care either. You can call whatever game you want, whatever you want. Some people play GTA and it's just a driving simulator to them. I've heard lots of people learn to drive that way, actually, which means you're playing it under 16, which is also a little weird, but that's a different discussion entirely. I don't know how meaningful any of the distinctions are outside of conveying the classification of games, just like the classification of anything to me, is just an evolution of human language and trying to help other people around you understand what you're talking about as quickly as possible. So it helps to have smaller definitions and then maybe even sub-definitions like subgenres, to where if I say, I like music, well, that's not a very helpful metric because you like music, but we might not have anything in common. If your favorite is Beethoven and my favorite is a heavy metal artist, and I do like metal in real life, so that's kind of why I go to that. But it's the same in that there's so many different kinds of games now, that if someone says, well, I really like playing video games, well, I do too. Well, you could be talking about Candy Crush on your phone, and I could be talking about, you know, GTA 5 on my $10,000 gaming PC, which is an example because I definitely don't own anything like that. Yeah, it's interesting. And to me, that's the whole point of saying, I like RPGs, and then you're trying to communicate, at least somewhat, the style of thing that you like to do. So as long as you can do that, then I think you're good, and you're achieving your goal. The last thing I had to say on it was I asked my fiance, who is very new to playing games, what an RPG was to her. And of course, I had to define the term RPG as well. I had to say role-playing game and expand on that. But her answer was, there's no game where you're playing as yourself, so you're always stepping into a role. And she thought that was a dumb answer. I really didn't. I kind of give that some weight, and I know this somewhat opposes what I just said, but everything is sort of an RPG, because you are never yourself. And even if you make yourself as a playable character, there still is that really you. And maybe the line will get blurred even further with VR, where you are yourself more literally, and you are doing things. But yeah, so my final stance on it is anything pretty much can be an RPG if you can try and define it that way. If you can defend it, it's an RPG. But that also is not the most meaningful thing that you could say in trying to communicate with another human the things that you are into.
Yeah.
Maybe go to a subgenre and say, I like tactical games on grids.
I think you're totally right that my new definition is labels are hard. Go play a game instead of label it, like taking the time to label it. I think is where I'm falling down on this.
Yeah, I like that too, and I agree with that. But it's fun to talk about.
I think it is fun to like subcategorize them.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I agree.
All right, I guess that wraps us up for this episode 3 of the Turn by Turn podcast.
Tell us what you think an RPG is. Are we right, or are we completely off base? Make sure to let us know, because we do care what you guys think, and maybe we'll address that in later episodes.
Yes.
if somebody makes a really good point.
Rolling rule that may change. I will try to respond to everybody that reaches out. You can tweet at us at Turn by Turn Podcast, or you can tweet me directly at McGarr Mentions, and I will do my best to respond to everybody that messages me.
And he's good at that. That's how I ended up here. I was listening to one of his old podcasts and was a respondent, and he did get back to me, and here I am.
I try to do my best to get back to everyone that messages me. Just fairly good experiences so far meeting people online, so I'm not gun shy yet. So if you message me, I will do my best to message you back. Nothing scary, please. For Alex and I at Turn by Turn, we will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye, guys.